Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. This is Season 6, Episode 18. Today I'm speaking with author, shopkeeper, and food writer Lily Ramirez-Foran. Lily Ramirez-Foran is the founder of Ireland's first Mexican boutique grocery store and cookery school. It is called Picado Mexican, and it's in Dublin. She's also the author behind the popular new Mexican food blog, A Mexican Cook. Lily has a new cookbook out called Tacos that you can purchase from Blasta Books. We have a link for that in the bio, as well as the links to her websites. Without further ado, I'm going to take you to my wonderful conversation with Lily. I had a really good time talking to her, and I felt like I could talk to her all day. And here we go. I'm very glad to get to talk to you. And
Thank you.
I was recommended to talk to you, and I got to look up your information. And yeah, I was really I've just really been very much in love with your blog and your recipes.
Thank
And
you.
I'm really looking, I'm gonna get the book and do a review of it. I can't really wait to read it because it really looks amazing. I love Mexican food very much. I grew up with it. I grew up near the border. It's in my blood. A lot of my family members, I grew up, cooking beans, having fresh tortillas and tamales all the time. So it's in my blood, and I really feel very close to it. So I was really curious to talk to you and bringing it to Ireland. When I lived in England in the 80s, Mexican food was impossible to find. And if you did, it was iffy. The tortillas were horrible. And like the avocados would be as hard as sugar pine. And it was just not good. And I just gave up. I never even tried to find Mexican food there because it wasn't worth the time. And I'd wondered, I had people telling me over time that it's starting to slowly get into London. They said it was coming into Ireland, and I think they might have been referring to you. So I wanted really, really wanted to talk to you about that and your growing up and everything, So I'm so happy to talk to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited about it. Apologies for the light. I have a north face kitchen, and it's so hard, and there's so many windows. It's so hard to kind of find a spot where the
No,
light
you're
doesn't.
totally fine. I'm loving all the jars and stuff behind you. It's like
Oh,
my kitchen.
stop! Yeah, it's like disaster. We're actually going to get our kitchen renovated. Hopefully in the next 3 months. So we're slowly eating our way through everything on the pantry because I just don't want to. We're going to have to move out for at least 3 months.
Ooh.
So the least I am, it's been very cathartic for the last 3 months. We've been eating out of the freezer, every cupboard, because like any other cook, I tend to hoard food and spices and stuff. And oh my God, I like a good Mexican. I don't care about sell-by dates. So, some people, my mother-in-law is really weird because she goes around and she does a cleanup of her covers every 6 months, and anything that's out of date she throws. And I'm going, that's so wasteful. Why are you like, cinnamon sticks? No, like don't, they're fine. And she goes, no, no, they're not as potent. And I have this thing growing up that you cannot waste food, and it doesn't matter. Unless there's something growing on it or it smells funny, you eat it.
Yeah, my wife and kids are like that. If it expired yesterday, they'll throw it away. And I'm like, do you think your head's gonna explode? What do you think's gonna happen to you? You think you're just gonna suddenly seize up and die? I mean, it's just a
I
sell by date.
know.
It's a suggested date.
It's a suggestion. There's so much food waste. And I always tell people this story. When I first moved, I'm in Ireland now 21 years, which is really scary because I'm going to be living in Ireland very soon, longer than I ever lived in Mexico. And it's kind of such a weird thing to even say, because when you ask me, I am Mexican and I feel Mexican. And even though I've been here almost as long as I ever was in Mexico, I still feel like, Mexican, It's only when I go back to Mexico that I feel that I understand how much my life in Ireland has changed me as a person, right? When I go to Mexico, I kind of miss tea, and I miss, little things in Ireland that, we don't have in Mexico. But I always tell this story. When I first moved, there was absolutely nothing. in Ireland that was Mexican. Nothing. And actually, in fairness, I came in when the Celtic Tiger was roaring, and there was a lot of wealth in the country, and people were traveling a lot and everything. And I remember going through like the supermarket and going, why there isn't any beans? The only beans I could buy were like the Heinz baked beans, which to me were horrific because they're sweet and they're just disgusting, right?
Yeah.
I grown to love them, not the tin ones, but homemade ones. But at the time, I remember thinking, this is crazy. And there was absolutely nothing. Forget about fresh produce. Like nobody, my in-laws never had an avocado or a mango. I remember the first time I found an avocado, and I kind of went to share it with them. They looked at it and they were like, how do I eat it? Do I bite it? It was all these, completely alien food. And at the time there was a supermarket chain called Super Value. They're long gone now, but it's not Super Value, sorry, Super Queen. And Super Queen was really well known in Ireland for being sort of like a posh version of a supermarket. They were very into quality, and it was really good food they sell. And there was a guy from Colombia who was working as a head buyer, probably on year 2 of my arrival in Ireland. So this is maybe 2001. And he obviously was missing ingredients from his homeland as well. So all of a sudden I walked into Super Queen and I saw these jars of mole and jalapenos, and there were a few things. I clearly remember the mole because it's a very iconic glass kind of jar.
Oh yeah.
That hasn't changed in years, right?
Yeah.
And I remember going, oh my God. And I literally took, there was about 5 or 6 Mexican things in, and they were all one brand. And I remember taking them all from the shelves, putting them in my trolley, and happily walking to pay for them. And we had like a shed outside in the house, and it was really cold. So we had it kind of shelved to basically like this one, but outdoors, to keep stuff cool. And I remember going to every Super Value in Dublin, not Super Value, I keep saying Super Value, Super Queen, and buying all the existence they had, because I was it paid off, because obviously in 2001 nobody knew Mexican food. It was really, really alien. So there wasn't, and mole is very acquired taste. I find out for Irish people it's not something they love initially. So I bought everything. For years, Dina, I was eating out-of-date mole, and not one jar out of that shed went to waste. I ate 5-year out-of-date mole, and I'm still around, So it's all about how you keep food. And let's face it, a lot of these commercial brands are so full of crap that, it doesn't, they'll survive an apocalyptic war, and, they'll still be okay. So sell by dates, they're a guideline, unless there's like dairy or something, properly, that will go off. But and that initiative of Mexican produce was kind of very short-lived. They never really restocked the shelves, so I was probably the only buyer they had of all those products, but I bought them all.
I had a prawn, avocado prawn in England back in the 80s, and I went to cut into it, and it flipped right off my plate, and I got it back, and I took the knife and I was poking it, and it was as hard as a countertop. And I called the waitress aside and I said, what do you call this? And she says, it's an avocado. I said, this isn't edible. This is not ripe. You can't eat this. And she's like, oh. She goes, no wonder nobody's been able to eat it. And I said, yeah, that's gotta be, you gotta have some give there. You can't just. I said, well, how do you expect me to possibly eat this? She's like, I thought it was more of a container for the food. I'm like, no, you're supposed to be able to eat this. That's the whole idea.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
So for our listeners who are not familiar with
Hmm.
you, can we talk a little bit about your background?
Of course. So I was born in Mexico, born and rare in Mexico, and I was studying. I always love languages, so I was studying a major in Japanese and a minor in English in college. And on my first year in college, I applied for a, it's like a scholarship, and you, it's for people who are studying Japanese at university level but have never been to Japan, and it's something that the Japanese government organizes every year, right? So you go in Mexico, it's different in every country, but in Mexico you go through, you get a test, and then you go through an interview process, and then they choose 2 or 3 people and they bring you to Japan, all expenses paid, and it's a study trip, it's a cultural trip to see Japan, right? So I applied and I got chosen. So I went with another, there was 123 people from all over the world. They were all studying Japanese, and we spent a month traveling through Japan and seeing Japan for the first time, all together. And in that same trip, there was this Irishman, uh, this young Irish guy, and it was love at first sight. I just saw him and I knew I was going to marry the man. And so we became friends, and you know, sounds like crazy, but this is maybe 23 years ago. I didn't have a computer. Email was just starting to be kind of mainstream.
Oh yeah.
So we used to write letters to each other. The first 3 months of our long distance relationship, we had letters, and then email and chat rooms, and all of that happened. So I met Alan in that trip, and I ended up moving to Ireland 8 years later. And we spent, like, he went to Mexico the year after we met, then I came to Ireland, then we met in New York, then they went back to Mexico, and then eventually we said, look, we just need to live in the same country to see if this is going to work. So I left Mexico and came, decided to take a career break and do some, go back to college. And on year 3 of my stay in Ireland, we got married, and we're together ever since. So, but I came in pretty much with a language and kind of business corporate background. And while I was in college here, I kind of realized that I had a passion for cooking. And I come from a family of great cooks. My mother and my great grandmother, my grandmother, they were all amazing cooks. And I was one of those that was very hesitant to get involved in the kitchen, because I kind of felt that it was very defining for a woman to embrace the kitchen. It was what was expected of you, because you were going to be somebody's wife and somebody's mother, and you had to be good in the kitchen. And I sort of rejected that stereotype for a long time. And then when I moved to Ireland, what I found was the first 3 months were amazing. I loved my meat and 3 veg. Everything in Ireland was incredible, and I loved it. But after 3 months, I started getting the shakes and going, oh my God, I kind of need a tortilla, and I need kind of like
Yeah.
some carne asada and some salsa and a little bit of chili in my life. I love Irish food, but it was a big cultural shock for me, not being able to get food. And then that's when I realized that if I didn't get into the kitchen, I was going to be homesick forever, because who we are is so connected to what we eat. And I'm not talking about if you eat kale, you're going to look lovely. I'm talking about the core of your heritage. When I get sick, I yearn for a bowl of chicken soup with garbanzos with chickpeas and a little bit of chipotle and a slice of, queso fresco and a hug of my mom, right? But I couldn't have the hug of my mom. I needed to learn to make that damn chicken soup so I could have it. That's how it was. It was sheer necessity, getting into the kitchen. And once I got into it, I realized I really loved it. And I saw it as an opportunity for me to showcase what Mexican food was truly about, because there was a lot of misconceptions at the time. You know, a lot of Irish people had, and still have, even though after I've been at it for 20 years, they have this idea of Mexican food that's quite stereotypical, right? And
Right.
it's your hard shell taco, and it's everything is fried and everything is brown and everything has truckloads of cheese and a
Yeah.
mountain of coriander and all these things. And there was so little, 20 years ago, there was little or nothing on Mexican food. And what was there was so abysmally wrong that, I felt like it was my duty to set the record straight. And I started with my family, conversing everybody, my Irish family, conversing everybody into proper Mexican food. But eventually I realized that, I loved the process, and I started taking loads of courses and reading a lot. I'm an avid reader, so I do a lot of research. And but I was constantly complaining about what was passing for Mexican food, and my other half was so patient. Probably got so fed up at some point. I remember this clearly because it was 2010. I said one more time, oh, this is terrible. Like, why people think this is Mexican food? And he turned around and he said to me, look, if you're not happy about it, do something. And I remember thinking, you know what, you're right. I'm going to start doing something about it. And I started writing a blog, and it was really cathartic, because, like, if you read, I've taken out a few of the posts because they were very passionate, right? But if you were a follower from the first stages of the blog, there was very little photography because I didn't really know much about photography. And there was a lot of rants. There was a lot of anger over, things that were being done to Mexican food in Ireland, and I was not taking any of it. But I used the blog as a way of, letting out the rage and starting to write recipes and documenting recipes from my family that, I nobody had written, and I think that sadly sometimes it's what tends to happen in many families, that recipes stay in the family and they don't get documented, and they get passed down from mother to daughter until you get to a generation who doesn't cook, and then everything is lost. And we were getting to that point in my family, because I had decided I wasn't going to cook, so I've been working extra time getting as many recipes as I can from, time when I grew up, and then taking them and adapting them to what I can easily get in Ireland as well, because that's also important. And at some point, my writing became constricted by the ingredients that I could get in here and the ingredients that I could substitute to, with success. And that's when the shop came about, because I was like, you know what, I need a regular supply of masa. And while I was writing the blog became really popular. I think it was the right time as well, the right time for Mexican food. And there were things happening in London, because I think the UK is about 10 years ahead of us when it comes to Mexican food, right?
Right.
Bigger population, more the Mexican population, the Latin American population in Ireland is quite small compared to, what you get in England. So they have been making Mexican food better than us for a long time, right? So I think people were traveling to London and, getting all these fab new tastes, and then coming back to Ireland and going, oh, well, I want to cook it. They would find my blog, but I was getting boxes sent from home, and I was bribing friends to come and bring me stuff. So that's where the opportunity for the shop kind of came about. I was like, well, if I'm bringing stuff for me, I might just as well bring it for other people who want to cook the same way. And that's how we started the shop. The shop started online, and it remained online for 4 years. And then we found a brick and mortar place for it. And when I found it, I was adamant that we needed to have a kitchen in the space so that I could show people how to use these ingredients. Because I was online, I was preaching to the converted. If you found us, you were looking already for Mexican food. But the challenge now was to have a high street shop and getting other people, not just those looking for Mexican food, but just the regular Joe to walk in and buy stuff. And so from the word go, we had the kitchen and the school attached to the shop, and it's been a great kind of symbiotic relationship, because the school creates a demand for the shop, and the shop creates a demand for the school, and it's worked really, really well. Before COVID or pre-COVID, we had a waiting list of 6 months for the classes, because I just couldn't host enough classes to hit the demand. So it's been really exciting, because I've had the opportunity to showcase my heritage in the best way possible.
I don't know if you've been to America much, but I know that we have two holidays that are close together here every year. We have St. Patrick's Day in March, and then we have Cinco de Mayo. And on both of these days, they kind of reduce both cultures to clichés. And it's kind of always maddening to me, because they'll trot out on St. Patrick's Day some horrible corned beef and overcooked cabbage and potatoes, and they'll drink ridiculous amounts of alcohol and even drink horrible green beer. And then on Cinco de Mayo, they'll trot out all this cliche Mexican food covered with cheese, as we said, and then they'll drink ridiculous amounts of, say, Dos Equis and tequila. And I think it's kind of an example in our culture, and maybe others, where they reduce cultures to cliches. Like, we don't know anything about them, so we'll just get a cliff notes on it and interpret it as we will. So living in Ireland as a person from Mexico and seeing how both cuisines are treated and misunderstood, has this been like a revelation to you, as far as like how you may have thought of Irish food and what you know now, and teaching people how to cook Mexican food who have the same issue in their culture? Has this been kind of something you've had as discussion?
Yeah, well, we have it every day in every class. It went from being maddening and enraging to being actually fun, to show people that the stereotypes are just so wrong. And the number one thing that happens in my classes, it doesn't matter which class you take, there's always a salsa, at least one salsa in the class, because there's no Mexican food without a good salsa. So we host groups of 12 people, and I always go around the table and I go, how many of you have made a salsa? And there's inevitably at least half of the class puts their hands up. And then I ask, how do you make your salsa? And this is the same response with slight variations around the table. They go, well, I chop loads of fresh tomato, some onion, a bit of fresh chili, some garlic, coriander, splash of lime juice, sometimes a little bit of olive oil, and then that's my salsa. And I go, you know what? It's lovely, but it is not a salsa. And then I go through the process of explaining what a salsa is, what a real Mexican salsa is. And it never fails to shock the people in the class. And I think what we do at Picado, and I think that's really important when you're fighting any sort of stereotype, is that you show them how the real thing is made, but you also give them the background, or where, the dish, how the dish evolved, where it came from, and why we're doing it now. And I think salsas are a great example, because salsas in Mexico are sort of an heirloom. Every family has a core recipe, 2 or 3 recipes that they're considered their own, and they're being passed down for generations. And it might not just be a simple salsa verde, but it has this added extra. And Mexicans are really weird when it comes to sharing salsa recipes. Because it's a very poor country, and a lot of the salsas are considered heirlooms. Yourself, if you have an entire strip of taco trucks or taco stands, the one with the longest queue is the one with the best salsa. Mm-hmm. So people consider salsas a very valuable heirloom. If you married into a family that has a particularly good salsa recipe, it might take you 2 or 3 grandchildren before you're let into the recipe. It is a really weird thing. If you corner a Mexican to give you a salsa recipe, you can be damn sure they're going to leave something out so you can't replicate it. And I think the entire, building up the momentum to then show them a very simple recipe of salsa that doesn't require any chopping, that it's very simple. It's a pan-fried salsa roja that's on the bowl in my house and in my mother's house. I grew up with a bowl of these on the table every day, and when you run out of it, you just make a fresh bowl again. And I think sharing those type of stories and the cultural nuances of the cuisine is really important, because I think the recipe stops just being a recipe and becomes this story that people can then retell. And when they're making that salsa, customers keep coming back and going, oh my God, I make that salsa all the time. And every time I tell that story, and then it's just this ripple effect. You had it with one person, and that person's spreading it along. And I think that's the best way to fight stereotypes. It's funny because I see that a lot now with Irish food. We get a lot of kind of newly arrivals into the shop, either young Mexican students that are coming in for exchange, or you get like Americans that have just moved into Ireland and they're missing Mexican food, and they walk in and they all complain about, oh my God, it's just like, I can't get Mexican food anywhere, and Irish food is so bland. And I'm going, is it really bland, or are you just cooking the wrong thing or eating in the wrong places? And I think Irish food is incredibly delicious, and its strength of it lies on the strength of its ingredients. You cannot get better, and sorry, New Zealand, but I truly believe Irish lamb is outstanding. Irish beef, proper grass-fed beef is incredible. And all it needs is a sprinkle of salt and a sprinkle of pepper and a really hot pan, and then you caramelize that fat. And this is what I think when we talk about culinary stereotypes, this is where people kind of forget that, we're so lucky in Ireland that I can get on my car. I live in Dublin, in Dublin South. I can get on my car, and in 15 minutes, I can be on a farm buying fresh eggs, fresh lamb, veggies. anything that you want, super fresh. And that's not something, sadly, where I come from in Mexico, that is not something that happens, because it's a 5 million people city. It's very big. It's it's all about convenience, and there's very little fresh stuff. You do have to travel a lot longer. But when people come in for the first time and they see that you go to a supermarket here and you don't have the 50 different brands of cereal, or the 20 different types of, there's not as much variety in brands as you would find in the States or in Mexico. But what's there is really, really good. And it's just a matter of showing these people where to buy and how to buy it. And then just cooking becomes a joy. And it's easy to break stereotypes that way, I think.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org.
Do you have nostalgia for some of the things you had growing up? I know your father ran a tortilleria in a small town of Mante. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, correct.
In the state of Tamalpais. Can you tell us about your memories growing up around the father's tortilleria?
Actually, my granddad and my dad, everybody on my dad's family on his side had tortilla bakeries, right? So I grew up, I have these really clear memory, and it doesn't matter. I think it gets stronger as I get older, of me visiting here at the area, and it was next to their house. It was in the same land. And I remember, probably I was about 4 years old, and they had started to use the mechanized tortilla machines, right? But he was still nixtamalizing corn and milling it in volcanic stones and all that. So there was no maseca, no masa harina introduced yet to the bakery. And my grandfather sort of rejected it until the day he died. He was totally convinced that we were compromising on flavor and on quality, and he was right. The progress had a cost. But I remember standing at the back of the tortilla, and they had 2 long machines. And if you're familiar with the way they work, and these were the very old ones, but I think they still, even the modern ones tend to be slightly smaller, but they still work on the same principle of, conveyor belts. So you have comales or hot plates that ran in conveyor belts, and they were to mimic the 3-stage of cooking that you should give a tortilla to give it a proper structure. So they'd come out from the cookie cutter, let's call it, a tortilla cutter, and they land on the first conveyor belt, which ran really fast, and then they drop on the other side in a conveyor belt that ran a lot slower, and then they fall into a third conveyor belt that ran fast again, and that would give the 3-way cooking. And after the last conveyor belt, they would fall into a chicken wire conveyor belt, and that was just cooling. So they came out really puffed up at the beginning, and as they reached the end of the conveyor belt, they had flattened, and you would just pile them up. So I remember standing at the back at the back of the machine with my grandpa, and I having a stick of butter in my hand, and he would hand me one of those really puffed up, super hot tortillas, and me rubbing this butter in it, and just all the butter dripping down my arm and my elbow, and then rolling it up and biting it. And it is just, I can still taste it, Dean.
You're making me so hungry.
really strong memories that it'll never leave me, right? And it's funny because I don't have a lot of, as a child, I suppose, I don't have as a strong a food memory with my doing that with my dad, but I do have this one really strong with my granddad. And I don't remember, I can't remember seeing his face, but I remember seeing, like, standing next to him and just seeing his trousers. And he always wore khaki kind of pleated trousers. I suppose he was of a certain generation. But I think that never leave me, the whole process of the rhythm of corn. And Mante was a really well-known tiny town. It was very small, but it was surrounded by sugarcane fields. So Mante has, and Jico, there were two small towns in Tamaulipas. They had at the time the biggest production sugar factory in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
So they were very, I suppose they were very, I don't want to say wealthy, but very affluent towns, bustling towns, because there was all this economic activity happening. And we lived in Mante for probably about 6 or 7 years when I was a child. And then we went back to Monterrey, where I, spend the rest of my life. And where originally my mom and dad are both from Monterrey, but my dad's parents emigrated to Mante and set up the tortilleria, and they never left. And a lot of the family still lives there, but my parents returned to Monterrey. But the whole town had this rhythm that went with the sugarcane season. So it's some of the most interesting memories and food memories in my life are kind of all set up in Mante, even though I spent the majority of my conscious childhood and teenage years in Monterrey. Most of my food memories come from that time we spent in Mante, living there. So it's a bit strange, but definitely I don't think that really strong memory of me eating this rolled up tortilla with massives of butter has ever left me. And I try and replicate that in the classes. I always have some butter, Kerrygold, always. And I kind of put everybody makes tortillas for the first time. And when they get one that's really puffed up, I go, you can get married now. And here's a stick of butter. Do and roll it up and have your very first tortilla with some butter. And I think it's it creates this kind of Mexican and Irish, because this is what's more Irish than butter. And it creates this lovely kind of link between the two cultures. And people sort of get it, I think.
I think we always talk with people about what, their death row or last meal would be. And I always say some tortillas with butter, fresh tortillas, of course, with butter. It would be my last request, because that is just the food of my soul. That would be, it's still always like the best food memory I've ever had. It's magical. Are there any,
that's great.
Are there any indigenous recipes or indigenous dishes that are particular to Mante?
I think Mante is really well known. It's in the Huasteca, Tamaulipeca, right? So Mante it's quite a small town, and it's incredibly humid, loads of sugarcane, but it also has one of those weird places in Mexico where you find almost every climate in the planet, so it's very, very fertile and loads of things grow. But they're particularly famous for a thing that we call pellizcada. It's a cross between a sope and a gordita.
Yeah.
So basically it's a thick masa patty, and it's actually partly cooked, and when it's still sort of soft, they pellizcar means to pinch. So they kind of pinch, make kind of almost little wells,
Yeah.
a bit like what you do with oh my god, focaccia. Before you cook it, that you kind of imprint it
Yeah.
with your fingers. They do these when they're partly cooked, but they pinch them and they do loads, and they become these little kind of craters. Then they bring them back to the comal, to the hot grill or the hot plate, sorry, and they get some pork lard, and they kind of drizzle the top of these, masa shell, um, and let it kind of caramelize a little bit, and then you can choose what it goes on them, and they are so delicious. You can get beans and deshebrada, which is like beef, very braised with just garlic and salt for a long time, and then they shred it and they cook it in with a tomato and onion and garlic sauce. Is really, really delicious. So you can have some beans and that, some beans and cheese on it. They're just like that. They're so delicious. And Mante also makes one type of cheese that I yearned all the time, and it's a cow. It's a type of queso fresco. It's made with cow's milk, and it's really salty,
Yeah.
and quite. It's quite rubbery. Um,
Yeah.
and because Manta is so hot and so humid, you do need a lot of salt. That's one thing I don't miss, because
Right.
we eat a lot of salt. In Mexico in general, there's an awful lot of salt. When I moved to Ireland, I was shocked at how much not salty the food was here, and
Yeah.
it took me a long time to kind of reduce the amount of salt that I use. But this cheese is particularly good. So you put it on your pellizcada, and it is just, or like even a pellizcada with chicharrón and salsa verde. Oh my god, it's to die for. And now I'm hungry.
You made me hungry too. I know what you're talking about. I've eaten those around here and throughout my life, and it's one of my favorite things. I really, especially with like the beans and just the cheese alone, is a favorite of mine. Now, what has been the response of you opening Picado Mexican? We talked a little bit about that already, but what's some of the feedback that you've gotten from people in your area about it, and what's the impact it's had on its community?
I think it sounds really weird, because I don't honestly think that was Mexican food before Picado. I think we've been at it for a long time, and I think we had the benefit of being the first, and we're constantly innovating. But from the word go, from the very first time we opened the doors, it's been only positive response. I have never had anybody coming in and saying, we hate these, or this isn't real Mexican. Or I think it's because we approach it from where we're unapologetic. We do what we do, and we try and do it with respect, and we do it to the best of our abilities. And I think it's also because what I do, I'm very passionate about what I do, and I lay my skin on it. And to the day, you will not find anything in Picado that I do not eat at home, right? Well, I think there's one product, but I kind of gave in about that. I was very reluctant to introduce burrito wraps into the mix, because I wanted to have that separation between Tex-Mex, Cali-Mex, and Mexican food, right? And I always felt like in Ireland there was this heavy reliance on burritos as a Mexican food, and 99% of Mexicans have never had a burrito. You know,
Yeah.
burritos are very regionalized too. And the burritos that we have in Ireland are nothing to do with the burritos from California or the burritos from Texas or even the burritos from Sonora or you know, Chihuahua. So I was very reluctant. I wanted that stereotype gone, you know, and it took me a long time. But apart from that, everything on the shelf is stuff that's my buying policy. If I like it, I can sell it, right? If I eat it and I know how to cook it, I can tell you how to do it, and then you can get hooked on it, right? So myself and Lisa and Kevin working in the shop, we all have our favorite products. We all taste everything new comes in. We taste it first, and if we don't like it, it goes back, you know, to the supplier. We just don't stock anything that we can stand behind. And I think that passion sort of is contagious. And we've just been so lucky. And honestly, what's not to like? Mexican food is, you know, true Mexican food is delicious, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you are, our biggest problem in Ireland has always been the fact that people think that Mexican food is unhealthy and Mexican food is super spicy. And neither of the two are true. And it's really easy to show them. I can't tell you how long ago, it is a while ago, but I often get asked to do stuff around Mexico, you know, in Irish media, because I'm quite visible as a Mexican, right? So if there's something Mexican going on, they either want my opinion or they want me in, right? And a while ago, there was a really famous Irish rugby player that was doing Dancing with the Stars. And I got a call and said, oh, they're going to do, I don't know, I can't remember what, Paso Doble, something. Don't quote me on it because I can't remember what, but they were going to do it to a song from the movie Coco. And they wanted to have this kind of get them in the mood. And so they wanted a pre-recorded piece before their dance about Mexican food, and they were going to bring them to the shop, and I was going to show them some quick snacks and blah blah blah. And I was given a very long list of things that the rugby player would not eat. And he's really into his healthy food, and I'm convinced he was totally in his head. He was thinking about the stereotypical, you know, thing about Mexican food being super unhealthy. And I was like, yeah, no problem. We'll do tortilla chips. We'll do a fresh salsa. We'll do, at the time, I was still eating avocados. So I was like, we'll do a guacamole. And, you know, we can get into the spirits of it. But I was told, don't get offended because he won't eat it. He'll probably just pretend for the camera and that's it. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. No problem. So they came in, himself and the beautiful, you know, dance partner. And I started, you know, getting the stuff ready for you know, putting the recipe together. And he kept going, wow, I can't believe this. Like, you know, this is all so fresh. And I'm going, yeah, this is Mexican food, you know. This kind of idea you have of Mexican food isn't really, you know, it's just a stereotype. At the end, they ended up eating all of the tortilla chips, all of the guacamole, all of the salsa. He just couldn't believe that we were making something Mexican and was so fresh and so healthy. And I think to the day, that's one of my proudest moments, because I thought when he came in, I just thought he wasn't going to eat anything, and there was nothing left when they left. So it was really nice.
It drives me crazy when I hear misrepresentation of Mexican food like that, because when you have a chance to eat at somebody's home that's from Mexico, every time I've had lots of salads, lots of soups that are very vegetable forward with seasonal vegetables. I've had amazing preparations for fruit, amazing fresh fruit drinks. I mean, this is all healthy stuff. And people don't think about that. They think of like the chain Mexican restaurants and all the cheese laden stuff.
And that's why when I was writing the book, I was adamant I had to have a go at that, you know. I have a little rant in the middle of the book about because my book is on tacos, right? So
Mhm.
I wanted to set the record straight, because if you ask an Irish person about a taco, the first thing they think is, you know, the hard shell
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
horrible thing, processed crap. And so I had a go at it, and I have a taco dorado recipe, and I have a
Mm.
little. Christine, my publisher, keeps telling me to call them essays, but it is really a rant about, you know, how different a taco dorado from a taco shell is. And I had a lot of fun having a go. I'll never get sponsored by any of the big chains of Mexican food in Europe, but I'm fine with it, because I really had a go at it. I couldn't write a book on tacos and not address that huge stereotype.
Now, were you concerned that you would have some a lack of freedom of control when you initially started writing this? Were you of a mind that you really wanted to find a publisher that was going to let you do what you wanted to do, or were you concerned that they would want you to make something stereotypical?
It's funny because I've been writing a cookbook for 10 years. About 10 years ago, I got approached. I had an agent at the time, and I got approached by a couple of publishers. But my agent was adamant that we had to have like a proper proposal, and you know, I had to have the book in my head, and it was a great exercise because it actually I actually laid out the book properly with a table of contents and everything, a couple of sample chapters. You know, it was a very professional proposal. And when it went back, I knew nothing about book publishing. I knew a lot more now than I knew then, right? But the one problem I kept coming about wasn't as much as, you know, we want you to write something stereotypical. It was about Mexican food being too niche for a European market, right? And I kept saying to them, but look, I do this for a living. You know, I know there's an awful lot of people who are interested in Mexican food, have a business around Mexican food, and it's a successful business. So why do you think this is, you know, very niche? And there was it, you know, we couldn't convince the publishing houses that they could bet on Mexican food. And I think my timing was not right at the time. So I kind of let the idea fizzle, and I got very disheartened at the time. They were only interested on the numbers, how many, you know, followers you have on social media and all that. And what I always said is my social media following isn't huge, but it is very loyal. So if every person that follows me buys a book, you know, we'll sell out of a first edition, no problem. But it was just very difficult, and I'm stubborn, but I got very disheartened, and I just thought, you know what, a book is a labor of love. You make no money out of it. I just decided, you know, we leave it, and I stopped writing for a while. And then at some point, I know Christine Jensen, my publisher, for a long time. We've, you know, practically, you know, I started writing a blog, and, you know, Christine and Caroline Hennessy were running the Irish Food Bloggers Association. So I
Yeah,
was one of the first kind of core members from the beginning, right?
right.
And they were incredibly supportive. And Christine has been cookbook editor for 20 years. So um, I couldn't, and my agent couldn't either, understand why the publishing houses here were so reluctant to do Mexican food. So I just walked away from it and kept, you know, I wrote a lot for Irish media, but I kind of shelved the idea of a book for a long time. But a lot of it was already written, And I write a lot. I write mini booklets for my cooking classes, right? So when I got a call from Christine in January last year about her project Blast the Books, and her wanting me to write a book, the first book in the series, I never doubted for a minute that I was going to have the same issues that I would have had if I was on a, with a bigger publisher, or on a more, a more traditional publisher. The first thing she said to me is, I want your voice. And she knows me for a long time. She knows that I'm, opinionated and ranty, and I don't sit on the fence. So she wanted that from the beginning. And she gave me all the creative license in the world. And it was a very collaborative effort between the book designer, the editor, the illustrator, and myself. And it was an amazing experience. If I had to go through the writing of this book with somebody else, it would have been a completely different book. It would be very, sterile, and, because they would never allow me to write what I wrote in this book.
Now, this is available now on Blasta Books. You could purchase it online from the UK, as far as I'm correct.
You can Blasta Books. You can buy the book and all of the books in the series. You can buy them directly with Blasta Books. They ship internationally. It's also out in Book Depository, as far as I know, and there are a few specialized bookshops in this that are selling the book as well.
Yeah, you can buy it also if you're in the Bay Area. You can get it from Omnivore Books. I just want to mention too,
yes.
And all better bookstores. Yeah, so I'm really you must feel just over the moon to see your work in print. I mean, because you've been published in a few places, on like the Irish Times, for instance. Has this been just amazing for you to like have your name out in print and having your work going out to the public like this?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I have to say, the book has been an incredible experience. Again, because I don't have the usual horror stories of, the cover is horrible and I had no say on it, or they chop this recipe, or
Yeah.
because this was all very collaborative, and nothing that's in the book was not consulted and agreed between all of the amazing women involved with it. But it's also kind of, I see it as a little bit as validation, because I wrote for papers and magazines, but they're kind of just one recipe or a piece on an essay. When you kind of hold the book in your hand and it has your name on it, and you're in love with it, because this is, I think, the most important thing. A lot of my friends have written books over the last 10 years, and not all of them feel the same way I feel about the process of writing it, because publishing is a business, and at the end of the day, publishers need to make money. So they tend to bet on, they don't like risk. And in their eyes, I was a risk. And I think the most amazing thing, and this is going to sound really childish, but I think when we sold out of our first print run, and that was very quickly, like within a couple of weeks of the book being published, we had run out of books. I just thought that was the most amazing validation.
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of love to kind of go around all the people who said Mexican food was so niche and going, told you so. Very childish, but very satisfying.
Blasta Books
So it's
did.
been like,
I was going to say, they really did a good job by you. They really produced a beautiful book. I've been able to see some of the contents, and it's just really gorgeous.
yeah, it's unusual. It's an unusual size. Its size is hardcover, is A5, very colorful. and it is just beautiful. There's a beautiful feel to it, and the production value is great, and it's also me on the pages. I think that for me is really important, and that's most of the feedback we've gotten has been around the stories on each recipe. People are cooking the recipes and they're going, oh my God, this is amazing, but I love the story that goes with it. And I think that's a niche in the market that Blasta and Nine Bean Row Books has really hit on the nail. There's this appetite for just not recipes, but stories and for meaningful content. At the end of the day, you can download a recipe from anywhere in the internet. Some might work, some mightn't, but it's what comes with the recipe, the context that goes with it. I think that's important. And for me, that was the most successful part. I love every single recipe. They're well tried and tested because they're recipes that we cook in the school or I've done at home over the years. But I think the context of each of them, for me, it's what holds the most meaning. And I think that's all of the feedback we've gotten. I think the week before the book was released, I was terrified and full of doubt. And then, within 2 or 3 days of the book being out, a lot of people were texting me about the goat story, and I changed my Twitter bio and now there's a goat in it. And, there's loads of different things and things that have trigger people to identify with it. And I think that's really, really lovely. I couldn't be happier. And even though we're like, there's this kind of hype at the beginning because it's so intense, and then it starts to quiet down and you kind of feel a bit strange because all of a sudden you don't need to do anything with the book. It's just out there. It's doing its own thing. I think it's still, it's lovely to see people, and every other day I get a message from someone, oh, I made this recipe and it's lovely, and it's all that for me, it's just great validation and there's a great satisfaction. And my only regret with the book is that my dad couldn't see it printed, but other than that, I'm just delighted with it.
I wish you the continued success with this wonderful book, and I'm going to put a link to it in the bio so people can purchase it because they're going to want to do that. I also wish you continued success with Picado, your store and school. I really had a great time talking with you. I hope we really get to have you on here again. I could talk to you all day.
Thank you, Dean. Same here. It was great. And
that was my conversation with author Lily Ramirez-Foran. Again, you could purchase her book, Tacos, from the link on the website from Blasta Books, or you can visit the links to her websites that we have on the bio as well. Next week, we're going to have, on Monday, Raquel Sharp from the Charlie Cart program, which is a program that brings food education to communities throughout the United States. On Friday, we have author and food writer and also public programs director for the Museum of Food and Drink, Sari Kamen. And she also has the Food Without Borders podcast that was quite wonderful a few years back. She'll be on Friday. This episode is sponsored by the Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study in food, drink, and culture and human history. To learn more about them, you can go to the link on the bio at www.chnorcal.org. If you follow my podcast and enjoy it, I'm also on Buy Me a Coffee. If you like my work, you can reach out and buy me a coffee or share your thoughts at www.buymeacoffee.com. Well Seasoned Lib. Help us promote this podcast and share this episode with a friend by sharing it on social media. On Twitter, you can share me as @WellLibrarian. Follow the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast on Spotify and iTunes, and you'll get notified when new episodes are released. You can subscribe to the podcast newsletter and get updates on my articles and more at wellseasonedlibrarian.substack.com. Our podcast theme song, Talk About Love, is sung by the band Kitty Cat Fan Club.
Their label, Asian Man Records, is given permission for its use. You can check them out and other bands by getting the album at Asian Man Records website at asianmanrecords.com. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and keep on cooking.
I've been getting